Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming tonight. It's amazing to see all the different places and times that you're joining us from, and good to see some familiar names and faces from previous events. Anyway, I know you're all very keen to hear Tom, and we will get to that very soon. But I first need to say a few words about why we're here. I'm Emily Alder from Edinburgh Napier University, and I'm project leader for Scottish Shores Gothic Coastal Environments. This is a research project that's been running for the past 12 months. It set out to explore how Scottish coasts are imagined and represented in media and culture. We held 3 workshops during the course of 2022. In May, we brought the project group together for the first time to identify the most interesting links between Gothic studies, Scottish literature, and environmental studies. And after that, we each went off to find more about some particular topics that we set ourselves and met again in September to exchange findings. So this list here on the next slide, these are some of the talks that we gave that day. And finally, in December, we held an event which some of you here were at, called Casting Off. And here we invited speakers to cast off to worldwide shores beyond Scotland to see how Scottish cultural concerns might also speak to a global context. Over the past year, we've examined written literature, but we also looked at folklore, of course, and at television advertisements, museums, beaches, and cultural practices such as surfing. When we say Gothic coastal environments, this doesn't mean that we're trying to say museums are Gothic or that kind of thing. What it really means is that there are certain ideas strongly associated with Gothic literature, and we noticed that these ideas were being deployed or redeployed to represent Scottish coasts. This might be in terms of their animals and landscapes, but also their human communities, including people's life and work in coastal waters. These Gothic ideas are notions such as haunting or doubling. They are ideas about in-betweenness, about transgression of boundaries, ideas of unreliability or constant change. These are all characteristics of beaches and shores too. To give 3 examples, we found that in stories about coasts, characters often confront questions of identity or personhood, for example. Coasts also are often used to say something about politics, such as the security of national borders or anxieties about their porousness. And the coast is where scientists and communities notice and feel the implications of climate change. And these 3 topics are all significant for Scotland now and in history. They're all represented by our country's literature, media, and other cultural productions, including traditional stories long before anyone started writing them down. So this evening's event aims to celebrate Scotland's very long tradition of storytelling about coasts and shores. Tonight is the final day of the project, and after this we will be deciding how to take forward particular strands of what we found out over the past year. If you're interested in keeping in touch and seeing what we do next, then our website is here, and by joining the Haunted Shores mailing list, you'll be able to keep in touch and get notified about future events. Lastly, I have some thanks to give. Thanks firstly to our funders, the Royal Society of Edinburgh, whose grant has made the project possible, and also to my Edinburgh Napier colleagues, especially Jennifer Wood, Morag Cherry, and Wendy Stephen for their patience and support. Secondly, to my project collaborators, Carl, Monica, Jimmy, Joan, Julia, Daniel, Tim, Alex, and Laura. More journeys together with you, I hope. And lastly, most of all, to Julia Champion, who has worked on me with this project from its earliest stages, and without whose knowledge, enthusiasm, and dedication I could not have done without. She's done all the behind the scenes preparation for tonight's online session, but even more than that, the project itself could not have happened without her. So thank you so very much, Julia. I'm going to hand over now to Carl Bell from the University of Portsmouth. He will talk to you a bit about what the project has been doing with folklore, and then it's over to Monica and Tom. Thanks again for coming, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Okay, can people see that? Is that visible?
Yeah.
Yep, lovely, thanks. Okay, so I'd just like to start by thanking Emily and Julia for inviting me to be part of this project. I've really enjoyed it, and it's led to some fascinating discussions, particularly for me around the value of coastal folklore. And I want to just spend the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes, just going through some general kind of takeaways from what I've got from thinking about Scottish coastal folklore in particular. And then I think it'll lead nicely into Tom being able to demonstrate how coastal folklore always colors its kind of common and very shared human concerns with local circumstances and local geography. So why is folklore valuable? It gives people a way, or it gives us insight into how people relate to places where they live and work, and how they read and understand their landscape, or in this case, also their seascape, through the stories they weave around locations. At the same time, it tells us something about the way in which those places influence us, the way in which they make us feel, and the effect they have on us. So rather than trying to articulate those feelings directly, folklore enables us to express them through storytelling, through one of the most ancient and perhaps powerful forms of human communication that we have. So in short, folklore is important because it gives us insights into the relationship between the physical environment, shared imagination, the collective psyche, and the communal memory of a local community. Now, when we're dealing with supernatural folklore, which is my sort of particular interest, that usually indicates that a community is dealing with a location or a situation that encourages unease, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. And the supernatural is our way of marking out boundaries in our knowledge. It's the point where our natural explanation for things reach their limits, and where powers and forces and entities that we don't understand can intrude upon our natural world. So evoking the supernatural within a story has a powerful effect. As you know, I hope Tim's got some sort of supernatural stories here which are going to sort of demonstrate that when they mark out a location or a structure as special, even if that location is mundane, it could be a tree, a hill, a house, a boat, or whatever it is, by giving it a supernatural association, we kind of transform it. It's hitherto been considered as normal and natural, and then actually has this additional quality added to it, which is both frightening and alluring. And so once this association is made and repeatedly reinforced through stories, that location will never be the same again. It will never be looked at in the same way again. Our perception, our understanding of place has been subtly transformed by the power of storytelling. And I think this is really what a lot of folklore does. So how does all this kind of relate to coastal communities? I mean, coasts are obviously natural boundaries, and I've just suggested the supernatural tends to be associated and found at boundaries. Coasts are also liminal spaces. They're not kind of neatly divided by a firm boundary, but they're places where things meet and overlap and interact. And as Emily just nicely said, you know, they're places of in-betweenness. And that goes for things like land and sea, nature and supernature, life and death. So looking out to sea from land, coastal folklore abounded with stories of magical beliefs and rituals, observances and omens. And this kind of supernatural armory was directed towards either attracting good luck, avoiding ill fortune, most of all, doing whatever you could to possibly protect yourself from the prospect of drowning. 19th century folklore scholars and journalists often presented seafarers as among the most superstitious of occupations, of working occupations, more so even than miners or soldiers who similarly faced life-threatening dangers. And as fishermen were often seen to be the most superstitious of sailors, because not only are they dealing with the dangers of the sea that all mariners face, but also they've got the constant sort of dependency upon needing to find a sufficient catch to make a living. And these things could be disrupted by supernatural factors such as witchcraft. It was said on the Scottish coast in particular, around Shetland and the Orkneys, that local witches could summon storms, sink ships, or keep fishermen's nets empty. Likewise, the actions of fishermen or their families could also determine success or failure in their work. Whistling on board was said to summon a gale. Having a clergyman on board invited bad luck. Those ashore, if they pointed at the fishing boat served at sea, would encourage misfortune. Some Scottish fishermen were said to avoid using unlucky words at sea, even words like church or kirk. So folklore shows us a mentality in which people felt good and bad luck, and the conditions faced at sea were due to them, or perhaps possibly the malevolent supernatural forces of witches, rather than the sea or the weather themselves. It wasn't natural, it was to do with their kind of human influence. And you could say that seems remarkably arrogant, to assume the sea was responsive to these small personal gestures, that it knew people's sins, or that it recognized somebody whistling while they worked and they shouldn't do. But this all feeds back into this kind of magical mentality that folklore alludes to, that sought to allay the anxieties of fishermen and the communities. They wanted to believe they had some kind of small influence over the might and power of the sea. Now, looking at this from the other way, from the direction of the sea coming towards land, the coast is obviously where all the wondrous entities of nautical folklore washed up, the place where mermaids and selkies came ashore. Such creatures kind of remind us that folklore can serve to express sort of the strangeness and marvels of the sea, particularly for those who don't go to sea. It was a sort of a language, a symbolic language for talking about that experience of seafaring. Perhaps more frequently, though, the coasts were the places where the spirits of the drowned sailors returned. That's what we've got in that image there at the bottom. They dragged themselves out of the waves, back to land, back to a place of safety that their lost corpses could never reach. So such stories demonstrate a very complex relationship that coastal communities have, particularly fishing communities have, with the sea. It both provides and it takes. On the one hand, it offered an abundance of resources and a steady living. On the other, this kind of temperamental and dangerous environment took its tax in terms of boats and the lives of loved ones. So coastal folklore, especially those involving the ghosts of mariners, were a way for communities to talk about that brutal fact that loss and misadventure were part of the maritime way of life. Folktales also give us insight into the anxieties of those left ashore, of seeing loved ones go out to sea and being fearful of what may befall them. Kind of demonstrates a very strong emotional bond between coastal landlubbers and seafarers, if you like. So strong that in some stories there are accounts of people dying on land and at the moment of their death appearing to sailors far out at sea. So in these stories, ghosts are both kind of leaving land to go out to sea and coming from sea back to land. While such tales may be told to frighten, they also speak, I think, of a real sadness, to kind of what grief may inspire us to wish for, even if a ghostly return could never provide the comfort that the grieving desired. Coastal ghost stories also remind us that the sea is a Gothic space. It's one of the Gothic's kind of central motifs, that of the return of the past into the present, is constantly repeated by the sea's interaction with the coast. Things thought lost and hidden and gone re-emerge. They washed up on the beach, bodies, cargo, the wrecks of vessels, transformed by the sea, their secrets exposed. So these stories of ghostly return express a very sort of deep unease about the sea as a resting place, or rather a concern that those lost at sea cannot rest. Such tales suggested the spirits of the drowned were doomed to wander, denied a proper burial, and therefore denied the comforting sense of the dead being fixed in place. Coastal folk stories then can take us into the minds and cultures of fishermen and their families ashore, sometimes into quite dark and painful places. They're using fantasy and fiction to express very real, very world concerns. Yet, given all of that, and that's kind of why I put it's not all glum at the end there, we shouldn't overlook the fact that this is also a cheap and ready sort of social entertainment. While open to the cultural and social psychological insights that folklore may offer, things that do tend towards the sort of the negative, we shouldn't miss the point that there is often a healthy dose of humor and leg pulling going on in this. This is kind of woven into tales, tall tales, which are being sold to the listener in a convincing way. There's also a mixture of morals and life messages to be gleaned from these stories. Even pragmatic kind of skills about seamanship could be imparted through these tales too. Practical information about fishing, about the weather, about life at sea, delivered not in some dried lesson, but in a memorable narrative. So in summing up, folklore is important because it gives us insight into a local sense of identity, a local reading of place, a way to articulate community anxieties and fears. but also hopes that we small humans might have the slightest effect on the very callous sort of nature of the sea. As you listen to Tom's stories, tales that will undoubtedly thrill and entertain, perhaps be mindful of the real human experiences and concerns to which they're anchored, to their attempts to navigate that in-betweenness that is perhaps unique to coastal folklore. Particularly when we're talking about things like ghosts, they seem ethereal, and stories about them can seem as ephemeral as kind of a sea mist, but they leave a very heavy imprint on the hearts and minds of our coastal communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carl. That was great, really fascinating overview of the topic there. And yeah, I think that leads really nicely into the next session. So I'm going to hand over now to Monica Germano, who's going to introduce Tom. And after Tom's told us some stories, then there will be time for a few questions at the end to wrap up, as you may have a few questions for Tom about his work. All right, Monica, it's all over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Carl, for a great introduction to this session. And now we go from sort of theory into practice. We're very pleased to introduce Tom Muir, who most of you will know already. Tom is a native Orcadian storyteller. He has a lifetime of Scottish, Viking and Nordic stories to share. And they spring from his work in archaeology and museums, as well as from his own work in traditional storytelling. As a storyteller, Tom has traveled from Nunavut to Hong Kong and across Scotland, of course, Scandinavia and Europe. He also runs the annual Orkney Storytelling Festival, as well as telling and performing his stories. Tom has published and contributed to many books of Orkney history, Nordic tales, and Icelandic sagas. His first book was a retelling of a number of traditional Orkney stories, and it was called The Mermaid Bride and Other Orkney Folktales. This was translated into Japanese and Icelandic. Another folklore collection is Orkney Folktales, which I am a proud owner of. I don't know if you can see it here. That was published by the History Press. And he's currently working on another volume, which will also be published by the History Press, and which we are particularly keen on, given that it will be focusing on the folk tales of and around the coast of Scotland. With his wife, Rhonda, Tom also has started his own publishing company, the Orkneyology Press. So we look forward to more work in print as well. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone. And thank you for inviting me as well. Always comes as a great surprise to me when anybody invites me to do anything. But anyway, I shall crack on. Being an islander, I was born next to the seas. The shore was my playground when I was a bairn, and that liminal space between the sea and the land was always seen to be a place where the supernatural creatures roamed, and you had to be careful living around there. But the first story I want to share with you is an Orkney tale. I mean, most of the stories here are from the far north here of Scotland. But this is my favourite version of a Selkie story. And most of you will have heard this before, and I couldn't care less, because you're going to hear it tough. Now, there was once a young man who lived in the East Mainland parish of Dernis. Now, one night he was going home late, and he heard music. Now, this was surprising, because where would music be coming from at that time of night? But there was definitely somebody playing a fiddle. Now, realizing that it could be dangerous, I mean, he didn't know who was playing. It could be anybody. It could be a band of robbers for all he knew. So he very carefully went along the shore, because he was curious to find out who was producing it. He went along the shore and he found a small outcrop of rock that stuck out from the banks of the shore, and he hid behind it. he was on a little rocky beach, but next to that, there was a lovely bay of sand. And when he looked around the corner, he saw in the moonlight that there were people dancing on the shore. And the music was coming from two fiddlers who were sitting on a flat rock playing fiddles. And all the people were dancing around on the shore. And all around them, there lay shapes, dark shapes, like animals lying asleep. So, very carefully, he got down on his belly and he crawled among the rocks and seaweed down to where these animals were lying asleep to see what they were. And when he got there, he saw that they were seal skins, empty seal skins. And he knew then that this was the Selkie folk, seals that have the power to take off their skin at certain times of the tide and dance on the shore. Some say that they're the souls of the dead who drowned. Some said that they were only the souls of people who had committed suicide by drowning and were condemned to live in the sea in the shape of seals. Now, one skin was much more beautiful than the others. It was a soft, silky skin, silvery colored. And he thought it was very beautiful. So he rolled it up and he hid it under his jacket and he went back to his hiding place. And he waited there for the rest of the night, just watching them dancing and cavorting. But as soon as the sun rose above the horizon, the music stopped and they all ran down to their skins, pulled them on, and jumped into the sea and swam away as seals again. All except for one young woman who searched frantically among the rocks and seaweed looking for her skin, but she couldn't find it. Now, in her desperation, she ran right around the corner of that rock, right into the arms of the young man. And he held her and he looked at her and he thought she was the most beautiful woman that he had ever seen in his life. And he would never be happy unless he had her as his wife. She had other thoughts, mind you. She punched them and kicked them and bit them and scratched them and squeaked it out in the Selkie tongue, because the Selkies have their own way of speaking as well. But he carried her up to his home where he lived with his mother. And when his mother saw him come through the door, carrying a strange girl with a sealskin, she was no fool. She knew what the girl was. Now, the girl sat by the fire weeping, and the old woman felt sorry for her. She tried to calm her down, and she went through to the ben end of the house. Now, these sort of houses, they were called butt and ben houses. The butt end was the kitchen, living area. The ben end was a bedroom, but it was also the best room in the house. It's where he would take visitors. And in the ben end of the house, there was a kist, a wooden chest. And she opened the lid of the chest and she dived down deep into it until she found what she was looking for, a dress that she used to wear when she was young and slim. And she took the dress through and gave it to the girl and helped her on with it. And she was good to her, and so was the man as well. And after a while, the crying finally stopped, and the old woman taught the girl how to bake and brew and spin wool and all these things that was considered to be a useful skill for a housewife in those days. And the man was very devoted to her, and she was very devoted to him. She followed him around everywhere he went. So it wasn't that long, and it was no great surprise when the two of them were married. And soon they had a fine little family of They said the bonniest looking bairns that had ever been seen in the parish. Now one day, the Selkie woman took her husband to the one side and she said to him, "You know that I'm a creature of the sea, and I know that you have my skin, and I know where you keep it as well. You keep it locked in the kist in the ben end of the house. But I want you to make me a promise. I know you always keep the key of that kist in your pocket and you always carry it with you. But what you must never do is let me get my hands on it. Because if I ever did, I don't know whether I would be strong enough to resist the urge to go and get the skin and go back to the sea. And I don't want to because I'm happy here with you in the Bairns. So if you love me, if you really love me, then never let me get that key." Well, he promised faithfully that he wouldn't. Now time passed and it was August, and it was the time of the Lammas Fair in Kirkwall, a great gathering of folk from all over the islands, doing for Shetland and across for Scotland. And they would all gather in front of St Magnus Cathedral in Kirkwall, and they would sell their wares. The man decided to take the bairns for a treat into Kirkwall to see the fair. They'd never seen it before. So he got them washed and he dressed them in Sunday best clothes, and he had a wash and a shave, and he also dressed in his Sunday best suit. And then he took the bairns out and he put them in the back of a horse and cart, and they set off for Kirkwall. And they had a wonderful day. The bairns ate things they'd never heard of before. There was like sugary stuff on a stick and things that they'd never heard of. But oh boy, did they like it. And there was games to play and there was all sorts of things. And by the time they headed home that evening, the bairns were tired out, lying in the back of the cart. But when the man got near to his house, he could see that something was wrong. There was no light in the window. There was no smoke coming out the chimney. And when he got nearer, he saw that the door was standing wide open. He ran in and he shouted for his wife, but there was no answer. And then a terrible thought gripped him, and he went through to the ben end of the house, and there was the kist standing with the lid wide open, and the sealskin was gone. And he knew what must have happened. You see, in his hurry to go, he had forgotten to take the key out the pocket of his jacket. And when she was tidying up, she wasn't looking for it, but when she picked up that jacket, she could feel the key in the pocket. And she took the key out and she looked at it, and she knew what that key opened and what was inside waiting for her. She ran through to the ben end of the house and she put the key in the lock and turned it with a click and opened the lid, and there was her skin. And when she saw her skin again, the urge just to pick it up was more than she could bear. And when she picked it up, the urge just to hold it close to her was too strong. And then when she felt that skin touch her own skin, and she could still smell the salt on it, she knew she had to go back. So she ran down to the shore, and with a cry of anger and anguish, she pulled on the skin and she dived into the waves and swam away. Now the man searched for a Selkie wife for the rest of his life, but he never saw her again. But they do say that when the bairns went down to the shore, and when they were playing along the beach there would be a seal swimming backwards and forwards in front of them, sobbing like its heart was breaking. So that's a wee story about selkies and the belief that the selkies were seals had humans in them. Only grey seals, the North Atlantic grey seals, the big ones. The harbour seals, common seals, they didn't have anybody in them at all. They were just seals. Now, while the Selkie folk are gentle and are usually the victims in these stories, although there's plenty of stories of Selkie men taking advantage of mortal women, and some mortal women looking to take advantage of Selkie men too. But there was another creature on the shore that was much more dangerous, and that was the mermaid. Now, it was said, there was a story in Orkney that the mermaid was the first to be made. She was the first creature, and she was the most beautiful. And one day there was a great queen was walking along the beach. Some said that she was Mother Eve herself, and she saw the mermaid sitting on a rock, combing her long golden hair. Now, in those days, mermaids didn't have a fish's tail. They had legs, same as anyone. And she was sitting there combing her hair with a golden comb and singing. And Eve thought, she's just way too good looking for her own good, that woman. That's going to do us no good whatsoever. And also, she was naked. So she sent one of her maidens, one of her serving maidens, to bring a dress to her. And the mermaid looked at the dress and she said, she took one look at it and she said a little rhyme. I'm the queen of the sea and mermaid's my name. To show me fair body, I don't think's a shame. No clays find my skin, no dress will I wear, but the bra tates of me bonny hair. A tate is a bunch or something that you can take in your hand. So she turned down the dress. Eve was furious. So she went to God to complain. Then she said, God, there's this mermaid sitting on the rock there, buff naked, and she's gorgeous. And what chance do mortal women have with her on the scene? You've got to do something to ruin their looks. Like what? Said God. Well, give her a fish's tail. That'll put them off. And so he wasn't keen, but there was a lot of nagging went on. And in the end, he went, okay, give her a fish's tail. But the men got wind of this as well, and they felt sorry for her. And so they made a slight, like small adaptation to this doom that was laid on her. If a mermaid could fall in love with a mortal man, and if the man loved her, then she could set aside her fish's tail and regain her legs. And that is why they're always on the lookout for human husbands. Now, across the Pentland Firth from where I'm sitting here, I'm in a wee town called Stromness, and it's a port town, fishing town, just across the water in the Pentland Firth. There was a story of a young Caithness man, and he was very, very handsome and very, very muscular and very slim and very athletic. And all the girls fancied him, and he knew it. And so he was never short of attention. But his looks had drawn the attention of someone else, someone from the sea. A mermaid had seen him and had fallen in love with him. And she decided that come what may, she wanted him. She would have him. She bided her time until one day he was down at shore, and then she swam up to a rock and she pulled herself up on it. And he hadn't spotted her still. So she waited, and then she started to sing a beautiful song. And when the man heard the song, well, he stared at the mermaid, and she was beautiful. And she said, "Come with me and be my loving husband, and I will take you to a realm under the sea where you will have great wealth and riches, and I will make you an important man. Come with me, and I will share with you all the treasures from under the sea." Well, he wasn't keen on the idea. He was quite happy where he was on land. He didn't fancy the idea of living in the sea. And they spoke for a while more, and the mermaid noticed that always the conversation went back to that riches. The man seemed to be a bit obsessed with money. That was his weakness. And a weakness is a powerful thing to know when you're wanting somebody to do something. So she said, "Come back here tomorrow at the same time, and I will give you some of the riches that I have." The next day he was down there, sure enough, and she smiled sweetly, and they spoke, and then she produced silver coins, dropped them on the sand in front of him. Well, he picked them all up and carried them off. They were ancient coins, probably from a shipwreck, no doubt. But it didn't matter, they were solid silver. They were worth a lot of money. And the innkeeper didn't care where they came from. I mean, he hadn't heard of there being any thefts in the area, so he thought that it must be okay. But silver, silver. And so the good times started for the young man. There was always plenty of ale and whiskey flowing. And, funnily enough, he was never short of company. As long as he bought the drinks, he had lots of friends around him, all wanting to share in his good fortune. He would go back down to the shore every day to see the mermaid, and she brought more silver coins, and then the gold came, gold coins, and then golden trinkets, necklaces, bracelets, rings, beautiful things with gems set in them. And the man was always boasting at the pub about his wealth, his riches. Nobody knew where it came from because he didn't seem to do anything. And he had no shortage of girls dancing attention on him as well. He was living the good life. Now, the mermaid was starting to get a bit impatient with him. I mean, she had wealth and power, and yet he refused to go with her. There was always a reason why it wasn't the right time. She got suspicious. And so one day she was floating out on the sea, a good bit away from the land. He couldn't see her, but she could see him, because mermaids have incredibly sharp eyesight. And she watched him walking along the shore. And as often as not, he had a girl with him. And as often as not, it was a different girl. And then the mermaid's jealousy started to burn inside her, because he would stop sometimes and he would embrace the girl he was with, and he would give her a kiss. And that did not go down well. But then she saw the glint of the gold that passed between them. Little love tokens being exchanged. Girls gasping with delight and looking at this wonderful thing. There was lots of girls wearing gold necklaces and bracelets and finger rings. And the mermaid was furious. That was her treasure that he was giving away to the local lasses. She decided that the time had come to take things into her own hands. She'd put up with him for long enough. The next time they met down at the shore, she didn't have any treasures to share with him that time, but she did say, "I've got something I'd like to show you if you're interested." Oh, what's that? Well, I know where there's a cave. And in the cave, there is all the riches from all the shipwrecks in the Pentland Firth. Now, the Pentland Firth between Orkney and Caithness is a wild piece of water. Tides in there are really strong. And it's the graveyard of many, many ships. So he knew that there must be quite a few, and there must be quite a bit of treasure. Follow me, she said, and I'll show you. He followed her along the shore. She swam ahead. And she could swim faster than him, so he was scrambling to keep up with her. And he came to a cave in a place called Dwarwick Head. It's near Dunnet in Caithness. And there was a cave. He'd never seen a cave there before. He knew the coastline well enough, but he'd never seen that. It was a sea cave. There was water going into it, and the mermaid swam into it. And he scrambled over the rocks till he was able to get inside the cave as well. And there sat the mermaid on a rock. And behind her, wow, there was piles and piles of treasures. There was gold and silver and gems of all colors and hues glinting away. It was amazing. The man was down on his knees, picking up handfuls of gold coins and letting them fall between his fingers. He was in rapture with this. And the mermaid started to sing, and her song was sweeter than usual. And it was always sweet, but this time it was really, really sweet. And it was really, really soothing. It was more like a lullaby. And he started to find his head nodding, and he fell asleep under the enchantment of the mermaid. When he woke up, it was dark. He didn't know how long he'd been asleep. He tried to move, but he couldn't. He tried to move an arm, no. A leg, no. And as his eyes got used to the darkness, he saw sitting on the rock, looking at him, was the mermaid. And he found the reason why he couldn't move was because he was fettered to a rock with a chain made of pure gold. He wanted gold, now he had it. He is chained to a rock in that cave, surrounded by all the treasures in the Pentland Firth, and guarded by a jealous mermaid who would not share him with the local lasses. If there's a moral in that tale, don't piss off a mermaid. They're more than a match for you. Now, the most awful, terrible, terrifying, vicious, deadly, nastiest of all the supernatural creatures that lived on the shore, one that would make a mermaid seem like a pussycat, was the Nucklevy. Nucklevy was a creature or creatures that was like a horse and rider. Now, some said that the horse and the rider were two separate creatures, but some said that the creature, the rider, seemed to grow out of the back of the horse and that they were just one creature. It had a tremendous hatred of humanity. It would have wiped everyone out. But luckily, it had a total horrible fear of fresh water, which burnt it when it touched it. It lived in the sea, couldn't stand fresh water. And in the summer, the seas is governed by the mother of the sea, a goddess who calms the sea, gives life to all the creatures in it. And when she rules in the summer, she locks up the Nuckleby so that it can't get loose and destroy mankind on the island. But she has a rival, a male spirit called Terran, who is the ruler of the sea in the winter, who brings the storms and drives all the shellfish out into deeper waters and the fish away from the shores, wrecks boats and ships. And he lets the Nuckleby loose. He's usually kept bound at the bottom of the sea, but the mother of the sea uses up all her strength, and so in the autumn, he breaks his bonds and the two fight, and that's when you get gales and the equinox. The sea churns, that's them fighting. She is driven to live on land as an exile, and then he rules the sea, but she gains in strength, and in the springtime, she goes and fights him again and binds him at the bottom of the sea, and that's the spring equinox and the gales that we get then. Now, the Nuckleby was not normally seen. It could bring disease and blight to crops and animals and people as well if it wanted to. Its breath was poisonous and it was not a pleasant creature. But there was one man called Thomas who lived on the island of Sandy. It's where my dad came from. And he was walking home late one night. And he was walking alongside a freshwater loch and the sea. And there was a small stream that flowed from the loch into the sea. But as he was walking along the shore, he saw a shape in front of him, a dark shape, and it moved. And he didn't know what it was, but he had a very horrible, uncanny feeling that this was not good news. And he carried on walking because he couldn't go anywhere other than back, because the sea was on one side and the loch was on the other. And also he'd heard that it was fatal to turn your back on an evil creature. It would get you. So he carried on walking, and the shape moved. And when he got a bit nearer, he realized to his horror it was the Nuckleby. Now, the Nuckleby, the horse creature, had a mouth as wide as a whale's, and it gaped, and steam came out of its mouth like a boiling kettle. Around its forelegs, it had flappers, same with the back, like flippers of fins growing out of the legs. And it had only one eye in the middle of its head, which glowed red like a burning coal. And then on its back, or seemed to grow out of its back, there was a thing like a man, but like a parody of a man. Its head was about a yard in diameter, about a meter in diameter. It was huge, and it was too heavy for its neck to support it, and the head would roll from side to side as the neck tried to support it. Its long arms almost reached the ground, and its hands were like shovels. But the worst thing about the Nuckleby and the horse, the whole creature, was its skin. It didn't have any. It was red, raw flesh, just meat in motion. And you could see the muscles rippling as it moved. And also when it moved, the tendons, the tendons and the sinews moved as well. They were thick as a horse rope, a tether for a horse, and they were white, and they moved whenever the creature articulated its limbs. And also its yellow veins could be seen, and in them was pumping black blood. It was a nightmare beyond any nightmares that Thomas had ever had. And he knew that there was no point running this creature would outrun him. And he felt that it was better to face your enemy front on than run away. It was best to see who was going to kill you. Now the creature came up so that the head of the horse thing was almost level with him, and the steam was coming out of it. And he turned and he tried to run. Just the monster had swept its huge hand down to snatch him, and he leapt back instinctively, and he landed in the loch, and some of the fresh water was splashed onto the horse's leg, and it roared in pain because it was burnt, like being burnt with acid. It roared in pain and it shied away, and you could feel the wind of the hand as it swept past him and missed him. Now, Thomas remembered about that little stream that ran from the loch into the sea. He knew that the Nuclevi wouldn't be able to follow him if he crossed it, because evil creatures cannot cross running water. So he set off and he ran as fast as he could. He ran towards that loch. By this time, the Nuclevi had kind of regained its senses of it. The pain was still there in the horse, but there was also anger, and it set off after him. It roared. They said it was like the roar of the sea, the sound it made. And as it got closer and closer to Thomas, the great rider took one more swipe at him. And at that moment, Tam leapt across the burn so that the monster only snatched the bonnet off his head. And Thomas landed on the other side of the burn, and he could see the monster in its rage ripping the bonnet to pieces and roaring in fury at having lost its prey, because now he was safely on the other side of the running water. And you can bet that Thomas never went out again on a dark night after that. And who could blame him? He was a sandy man. He had about wit about him. Now up in Shetland, back to Selkies again. So I do like a Selkie story. There is a group of skerries called the V skerries, V-double-E. Now a skerry is a reef in the sea. And where the V skerries lie is to the west of Papastour. You've got the mainland of Shetland, long and thin. And about kind of halfway down, there's the island of Papastour is to the west side of the mainland. And then west of that are these skerries. And some of them are quite big, but they are usually, they can be submerged at high tide. Storms will sweep the waves over them, and they are jagged. The rocks themselves are pointed, they point upwards. And they have been the graveyard of many ships. Many ships have been lost on the V skerries. Even as recently as 2019, it is something that is still not safe. Now, there was a group of men used to travel from Papastour, and they would take a boat out to the V skerries to hunt seals. They were after the seal skins, but they would also take blubber as well, that they would render down to use in the oil lamps for light in winter. Now, one group of men had landed on the V skerries, and they were busy with their bloody work, clubbing the seals and then skinning them and leaving the bodies lying where they were and throwing the skins into the boat. Now, one man was a bit further away than the others, and the men suddenly kind of realized that the wind was getting up, and it was getting up fast. I mean, the weather here can just change like that. And a storm was blowing up, and they knew that they had to get out of there. In fact, the waves were becoming so fierce by that time that the boat was in danger of being smashed against the side of the skerries. So the men jumped into the boat and pushed her off out to safety. But they wanted to pick up their friend who was still running towards the boat. He had been too far away. Now, they realized that there was no way that they could land back on the skerries safely and pick him up and take him home with them. And so reluctantly, they were forced to abandon him and to head for home, because the storm was really starting to rage now, and it would only get worse, and the boat would be lost, it would be capsized. So they decided to leave him to his fate. And as soon as the weather allowed, they would go back and see if they could save him. So they headed home back to Papa Stewart. Now the man was left on the island by himself, and his fate looked sealed. I mean, the waves were starting to come over the skerry now. He knew that he would be washed away. If he wasn't washed away, he would die of exposure anyway. But whatever, you know, he was going to die. And after a while, when it was the boat was out of sight, seals started to swim back to the island again. And they hauled themselves up onto the rocks. And then, to his amazement, they shed their skins, and people stepped out of them, men and women. And they went over to where the dead seals were, and they started to lament. They wailed, they wept, and they bent down and they touched the bloody carcasses on the beach, and they shook them. And to the man's amazement, the bodies started to twitch, and out of them stepped people. They hadn't been killed with the clubbing, they'd just been stunned. And now they were standing there, and they wept as well, because they'd lost their skins and they couldn't go back into the sea without them. They were doomed to live on land in whatever way they could, but they would never be able to go back into the sea to see their family and their friends. Well, one woman spotted where the man was huddled on the rocks, and she walked over to him, and he shrunk back in fear, and she says, "You need not fear me. I mean you no harm. But you have clubbed my son, and you've taken his skin. I will make you a bargain. I could save you. I could take you back to the island where you came from, in return for my son's skin. Give me back his skin, and I will give you your life." Well, the man said, "But how can we get back?" "You can ride on my back," she said, "and I will take you there. But the sea is raging, I might fall off," he said. "Can I cut a hole, a little slit in your shoulders and your flanks so that I can hold on with my hands and I can push my feet into it, and that way I won't fall off you?" "I will let you do that," she said. "Yes." "And how will I know the skin?" Well, it's a silver skin with a mottled pattern on it. You'll recognize it. It's a beautiful skin. So she donned her sealskin again, and he made 4 incisions in it, and he put his hands in through the slots and feet tucked in it, and she took to the sea, and she swam with amazing speed back to Papa Stewart. And he was dropped off back at the Gio where the boat had already landed and was pulled up. He was able to go up and to find that skin, the silver one with the mottled pattern on it. He took it down to the shore and he showed it to the seal and he said, "Is this it?" She nodded. He gave it to her and she carried it back to the V Skerries so that her son could rejoin his family in the sea. But after that, the man never went to the seal hunting again. Now, you're talking about ghost stories, and there was one that popped into my mind from the island of Hoy. There's a beautiful bay there called Rackwick. And there was a Rackwick man had been over doing some business in Longholt, and he was walking along the cliff road back, along the edge, the southern edge of the island, where there's sheer red sandstone cliffs that fall into the sea. Now, he was walking along those cliffs, and he had got down to a bit that was a bit lower when he met a stranger. Now, it was very unusual to see anybody on that path, and especially when it was getting dark. And the stranger came up to him and he said, "Do you have the time?" "Yeah," he said. And he took out a pocket watch and he told him what the time was. "Nice watch," said the man. "Is there a number inside the back of it that says 30707? And he says, "I don't know. I've never looked." "Well, look." So he flicked it up, and sure enough, there was 30707. There was the number as he'd said in the watch. "How could you know that?" "It's my watch," he said. "Your watch? But I bought it in Wick just not that long ago." "Yeah, I know. But it's mine." "Oh, well, I'm sorry. Do you want it back now?" "I don't need it now. Not where I am. No. You see, I was lost at sea. I was drowned. My body lies on a ledge at the foot of this cliff. There was a man found it. He was a fisherman from Caithness. And he took my watch. But he wasn't that observant, because if he'd looked in the other pocket, he would have found a fine gold watch chain, which was worth far more than the watch. Now, I'll give you that chain if you go and collect my body, bring it back, and have it buried decently in the kirkyard." Well, the man was shocked, to say the least, but he knew better than to argue with a ghost, and he said, "I'll do that." He went back. With that, the man disappeared, and he raced back to his home as quick as he could. Now, he gathered some of the other men together and he told them what had happened. And he said, "I'm not going back for it. He can keep his watch chain. I'm not going back." And one of the old men said, "You're a damned fool if you don't, because that ghost will haunt you for the rest of your days if you don't do what it tells you. Go and get its body. It means you no harm. He just wants to lie in consecrated soil." So they organized a boat and they went around the shore the next day. And sure enough, on the ledge, they found the remains of a man who had drowned and been washed up there. He was nothing more now than a skeleton with some pieces of sinew and skin still holding the bones together, but he'd been lying there dead for quite a long time. And when he looked inside the pocket, as he was told, he found the gold watch chain, the one that fitted his watch. They very carefully wrapped up the body of the man in a sailcloth, and they carried it back to Rackwick. They made a coffin for him, and they carried it up between the two great hills there to the kirkyard at Monas, and he was buried there. And after that, the man was never troubled with ghosts again. Now, do I have time for two? Possibly. I'll chance my luck. My mother came from the island of Westray, and she told me this story many, many years ago. It's a true story. It happened in the 1730s. There was a storm one night, and at the farm of Sequoia, there lived a family by the surname of Rendell. There's quite a lot of Rendells in Westray. Rendells and Drevers. Drevers is my mother's side. And the woman was sitting spinning by the fire one night when the door opened and her husband came in and said, "There's a sailing ship heading down to the rocks. I'm just going to go and get the neighbour and get chocolate wheeling stains from next door and go down to see if we can try to do something to save the crew." "Well, be careful," she said. "It's not a night to be out on." And sure enough, it's a howling gale. They went down to the shore, and there was the ship. Mast was broken and sails were tattered. It was being driven towards the rocks. There was nothing that they could do. It was too far out, and they couldn't launch a boat in that weather. It would be suicide. So they just had to stand there helplessly and watch. Now on the ship, all the crew were running around panicking because they thought that their time was up. And there was a woman on board. Now, some people say that she was the captain's wife, but I don't know how anybody could have known that. But she was on the ship with her son. Her son was little more than a toddler. And she tied the shawl wrapped around her very tight. She held the child to her breast. She tied her shawl around it so that it was tightly held next to her. And then she leapt over the side of the ship into the sea. And the ship was struck onto the rocks and ripped to pieces, broken to matchsticks. Now, there was nothing the folk could do, so they went home. And the next morning, when the sun rose, they went down to the shore to see what they could salvage. Times were hard. There's no timber in Orkney. We don't have trees. So any timber is valuable. Any timber washed ashore is a beachcomber's delight. And they were gathering up spars of wood, and they were gathering up sailcloth and rope and bits of the cargo here and there. And every now and again, they would find a body that they would pull up to bury by the shore, because you never buried drowned people in the graveyard, despite what I've just told you in the last story. It was believed that the sea claimed a certain number of prey every year, and that if you took away a body, they might come after you or a member of your family. And the sea would try to get into the kirkyard where the body was to try to get it back. So they were buried by the side of the shore. Now, the Rendell man, Sequoia, was walking along. He saw the body of a woman lying on the beach with a child tied to him. And there was a lump in his throat, and he thought, what a terrible thing the sea is. And then he saw that the baby made a slight movement and there was a slight cry. It was still alive, so he untied the shawl, he picked the child up and he ran home with it to his wife. He gave it to her and she warmed him up by the fire, heated up some milk and gave to him, and he was fine. And nobody knew anything about the ship, where it came from, or where it was going, or nothing. The only clue was that the man at sea had found a piece of wood, and on this piece of wood there was writing, but he couldn't read. So he took it to the minister, and the minister read it, and he said, "It says Archangel. The ship must have been a Russian one. That must be its port of registration. Could be the name of it, but it's Archangel anyway." And so the child that was saved from the sea got his name. They called him Archie Angel. And after that, he grew up and he married and he had a family. And for 150 years, there were angels on the island of Westray. And the last of them was Mary Angel, who was my mother describes a coarse set body. I always imagined them like Boris Yeltsin in a headscarf and pinny. And there was a teacher that had a tendency to keep all the kids back at school. If one of them had done anything wrong, they would all be punished. And so one day they were back there, doing with slate pencils, all squeaking away, doing their sums. And they could hear a mutter, mutter, mutter coming up close, and the door opened and Mary Angel came in. And she said to the teacher, "Where's me boy?" And he said, "Well, he has misbehaved. They are being punished. They'll get back." And she says, "Well, his tea's ready." And she went to get her son. Now the teacher, although an educated man, made a very, very basic mistake, because any fool knows that you do not get between a wild animal and its young. But he stood in front of Mary Angel to prevent her from getting her boy. She up with a fist and decked him. Down he went like a bag of spuds. And that wasn't enough. She got him by the collar and she beat his head off the floor until she knocked him unconscious. Grabbed the boy by the arm, dragged him out through the door, slammed the door and was gone. Well, the kids were horrified. Oh my God, Mary Angel's killed the teacher. And they started thinking, what sort of detention will we get for that? They thought I had pictures of themselves of old men with long flowing beards still doing long division. But one of the braver ones got a wee bit of water and splashed on his face and his eyes opened. And he said, "Can I give me a drink, boy?" So they fetched him a drink of water. He took a drink and in a weak voice, he said, "Class dismissed." They didn't need a second telling, they were out the door. But after that, they said Mary Angel became a bit of a hero among the kids because the teacher never kept them back in detention again. Now, I'm going to finish off with just a wee one, a story about myself. Like I said, born on a farm by the sea. And I didn't always used to be a short storyteller. I was supposed to be a farmer, but I hated it, And I had an epiphany one day. We were having to cut a field of oats by hand with a scythe, me and my eldest brother, because it had been 1979. It rained and rained and rained and rained all back at the end of the year. And the ground was waterlogged. It was soaking wet. You couldn't get a tractor on the field. To save the crop, we had to go and do it by hand, 19th century style. And I had the radio on in London calling by the Clash came on, and I thought, what this? I've had enough. I'm going to run away and join the circus. But there wasn't any circuses in town, so I joined an archaeological dig instead, and it was the nearest equivalent. And time passed, and I mean, you know, this was like 1980, early 80s, and there was a recession. It's funny that rich people can come up with so many names for shafting the poor. There's been depressions, recession, austerity. Oh, they're all full of grand names when it comes to shafting you. Anyway, I had to reluctantly leave the islands and go and look for work. And I travelled along the north coast, down to about Tongue, and I got a job on a farm there. And I worked in the hay, and the guy said, "That's really good. That's excellent. Would you be able to stay on for the harvest?" And I said, "Fair enough." I mean, I hated farm work, but it was work, you know. So I stayed there. Harvest was secured in. The stacks were built in the yard. Fine. And then there was a big party, a big ceilidh. And all us labourers stayed in the bothy, down by the shore. And we were all sitting there celebrating away. There was some folk were singing, some telling stories, playing tin whistle, fiddle, accordion, and I was enjoying it. And there was plenty of beer and plenty of whiskey, so I was happy. And I was sitting there rolling fags, you know, cigarettes, smoking away, as I used to do, and drinking whiskey, as I still do. And the farmer leans forward and says, "Tom, it's your turn to do something. You've not done anything to entertain us this evening. Come on, do a turn." I don't do a turn. I said, I don't know. He said, "Well, you got to be able to do something. Can you play an instrument?" No, I can't play an instrument. I said, "Well, what about singing us a song?" "Can't sing. There's a court order against me singing. Not happening." "Ah," he says, "well, what about, he'll know a story." "I have no idea. I don't know any stories. Nothing. No, not one." "Well, you know the old saying, though, Tom, you know, tell a story, sing a sang, show your bum or out you gang." And I said, "Well, I'm not showing my bum." And they said, "Well, I'm mighty relieved to hear it. But if you can't do something to entertain us, you're going to have to pay a forfeit." Oh, I said, "What's that then? Expecting something really humiliating, you know, or painful?" "You know me boat down by the shore there? Yeah. You know the old wooden baler that's in it? You know, they used for bailing the water out with it? Uh-huh. Go down and fetch me the baler." "Fetch you the baler?" "Uh-huh." "Is that it?" "Yeah. That's the forfeit." "Uh-huh. Oh. What do you want the baler for?" "I'm going to use it tomorrow," he says, "for measuring out some cattle feed for the cows." "Off you go." And he said, "You can take one of the old storm lanterns over there, you can light that, take it with you." I said, "This is not the bloody Waltons, you know, a storm lantern." And he went, "Shut up. It'll do you fine." So I got the old paraffin lantern, I lit it, and I carried it off down to the shore. And sure enough, there was the boat. So I set the lantern down on the shore, and I climbed into the boat, and there was the baler in the bow. So I went towards the baler, and I bent down to pick it up, and my feet slipped from underneath me, and I went down with it, and I banged my head, and I was out cold. Now, how long I was out for, I don't know, but when I woke up, I could feel the water underneath me, the bobbing of the boat. I knew I was at sea. So I got hold of an oar, and I tried it over the side to see how deep it was, because we could have just been a couple of feet off, you know, and it was pitch dark, but no, there was no bottom to be found. Ah, damn. I thought I must have been lying in the front of the boat, you see, and the tide must have come in a bit, and it slipped in the beach with the weight of me being in the front of it, and here I am. So I thought, right, well, I'll start rowing. I'm, you know, island boy, get the oars and the Rolex, I'll row back to the shore. Which way's the shore? No idea. we'll try one way and hope for the best. But when I tried to row, I found that I couldn't do it. I didn't have the upper body strength that I normally had, you know, and I couldn't understand why. I thought, well, maybe it was the whack on the head that did it, you know, but I couldn't make much of it. So I thought, I'll have a smoke. Everything seems better after having a smoke, I thought. So I put my hand in my jacket pocket on the outside to get out my baccy, because I used to smoke roll-ups, as I said. So I put my hand in there and I felt a lump. It was quite a big, soft, warm lump. And then I checked the other side and there was another one there. So I looked down, and instead of having an old denim work jacket on, I was wearing a white blouse. And I thought, huh? And I looked down, and instead of having a pair of jeans on, I had a skirt with a pair of slim legs coming out of the bottom of them. And I thought, that's funny. And then I had a wee check, you know, so south of the border. And what I usually kept there wasn't there anymore. It was replaced with something else. And I realized I'm a woman. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, you know, would you? So I busted into tears. And I tried rowing, but I was trying with one oar and then the other, but it wasn't getting very fast, going in circles. And I ended up collapsing in the stern of the boat and just sobbing. Sorry, I get a bit emotional with this because it's the memory of it, you know. Anyway, off we went, bobbing away, me howling away in the back of the boat, and I fell asleep. And when I woke up, it was daylight. And I looked out the boat, and I was on a shore. I'd pitched up on another shore, but it wasn't a shore I recognized. And there was a man standing on the shore looking at me. And he went, "Oh my God, are you all right?" And I said, "I think so." And he said, "Who are you?" And I thought, I don't know. But I didn't say that, of course. He said, what happened to you? Where do you come from? Oh, well, there was a shipwreck, I guess. Yeah. And I'm the only survivor. Oh, that's terrible, he says. Oh my God, your family must be so worried about you. Come on, come ashore. I'll come up to the house. And he said, your family will be looking for you. They'll be worried, you know, people will be up looking for you. And he said, what's your name? And I said, it's Thomasina. And they went, oh, come up with me, Thomasina. And so I went home and he made breakfast. It was really lovely. And he said, you must be tired after all of that. So he showed me a nice wee soft bed. So I had a bit of kip and got up and had a bite to eat again at sort of mealtime. And, you know, day passed, another day passed, another day. Of course, nobody came looking for me because, you know. So time passed by. But when I went into that house to start with, you know, that's when I first seen myself, because they had a mirror and I clocked myself. This was going by, and I mean, you know, I'm not one for boasting, you know, but I was hot, you know. I mean, I was fucking gorgeous. And, you know, so the poor guy, Andrew was his name. I mean, you know, he was only human. He fell in love with me. Of course he would. Why wouldn't he? And one day he went down on one knee and he proposed. I accepted, and the two of us were married. I had a lovely dress, beautiful white silk job, you know, straight, none of that big 1980s blancmanges that was all the rage at that time. You know, I was a classy bird. So it was like, you know, it was fine. And people were impressed because they said they'd never seen a bride drink so much whiskey at a wedding before. One day I started to feel a bit sick, you know, one morning. I had a craving for firelighters and I discovered I was pregnant. And I had a wee boy and called him Andrew after his dad. And then a few years later, I had another wee boy, called him Sean after my dad. And the bairns were like the love of my life. And they grew up till they were like, Andrew was 9 and Sean was 6, and they were just the apple of my eye. Now, one day we were out doing by the shore, you know, having a walk one fine summer's day, and the heavens opened. It started to rain, a rumble of thunder, a flash of lightning, and down came the water. And we sheltered under a tree, and Andrew says, "You stay there and I'll go back and get your coat from the house," because he was such a gentleman. He was a really good man. So I was standing there sheltering under the tree, and I saw a boat down on the shore, and I recognized it. It was the same boat that I had pitched up on this place with. And a thought took me. I thought, I wonder if that baler's still in there. So I went down to the shore and I looked in, and sure enough, the baler was in the boat. And I stepped inside and I thought, yeah, we shite in trouble you got me into. And I bent down to pick up the baler, and my foot slipped and bang, down I went and banged my head. And when I woke up, it was pitch dark. And I could feel the water bobbing underneath me, and I thought, well, here we go again. So I got up anyway, and I noticed there was a light in the distance on the shore. So I thought I'll row towards that. So I started to row, and you know, I was rowing really well. And then I noticed it, the smell, rather an unpleasant smell. It was a mixture of sheep dip and BO and stale whiskey and cigarette smoke. And I realized it was coming from me. And I looked down, and I was wearing an old denim jacket with a packet of tobacco and a pair of jeans and work boots. And I was a man again. And I burst into tears. Because what else could I do? I mean, I had babies, and I wanted them back, and I missed them, and now here I am, and I'm a man, and I don't know what else going on. So I rowed back to the light anyway, and I pulled the boat up on the shore, and it was the same storm lantern that I left there that night, all those like 10 years before when I got it. And it was still there, and I thought, that's been burning a while. That's a bloody good wick in that. So I got the baler, and I picked up the lantern, and I went back, and there was the house with the light still on. And I went in, and all the same folk were there, and they were all partying away in the fun. I went, "Oh, you're back, Tom. Come on, sit down, man. Have a dram." Well, I put that dram out of sight pretty fast, I'll tell you. And then he says, "Right, so what happened to you then?" So I told him the story, everything, just as I've told it to you. And he said, that must have taken a while. Well, I was like, and I got a 9-year-old son. It was 20 to 12 when you left, Tom. What time is it now? He pointed to the clock, and I looked, it was 12 o'clock, midnight. It was only 20 minutes since I'd gone out. And yet I'd lived another life as a woman and having babies and everything. And I didn't know what the hell was going on. But the farmer leaned forward and he smiled, a kind of a smile that suggested he knew more about this than he was letting on. And he said, "Well, Tom, if anybody ever asks you if you've got a story again, you'll have one to tell them now, won't you?" And that's it. I'm leaving it at that. So I've overran. It's terrible. But thanks for putting up with me.